Starting with the chart before page 131, the chart's called Chart 5, The Journey. It consists of ovals and circles within a big oval. The bottom circle is the Anabhuvan, the gross sphere. Then the yogi or sadak comes in at the first plane. The pranabhuvan is the subtle sphere. The mahatma comes in at the third, between the second and third plane. The mahayogis at the fourth plane. Above the fourth plane is the manobhuvan, the mental sphere, and the Mahapurush, or Sant, is at the fifth plane. The Satpurush is at the sixth plane, and the Brahmibhut is seventh plane, Paramahansa, seventh plane. Backing up a bit, the seventh plane is Manonash, final fauna, along with Nirvikalpa, the fauna phila. Then we get to the Turiya Avastha, or divine junction, the fauna Ma'albaka. The level of Vijnan equals the level of Lahut. The Jivan Mukta is there, and the Sadguru, and it's called the Atma Pratisthapana, or the Bakabila. Then we get, going up, we get the Halat and Muhammadi, with an oval of the Sat Chit Anand, the Vijnan Bhumika, or Hahut, and the Hakikat and Muhammadi is here. Then we get the Nirakar, Nirguna, or first we get the Sakar Saguna, Sakar Saguna, and that means divinely, unattachedly, unlimitedly, free from Maya, bound by infinite qualities, and by time, space, and causation. Then the Nirakar Nirguna means the beyond state. God in ordinary man state is bound by the same qualities of power, knowledge, bliss, and by same time, space, and causation, but in undivinely finite and limited state. At the Vijnan Lahut, conscious enjoyment of Satchit Anand. At the Turiya Avastha, conscious enjoyment of Satchit Anand, and also conscious of the three bhuvans. At the Bakabila, conscious enjoyment of Satchit Anand, conscious of the three bhuvans, and makes use of Satchit Anand for others. Fifth plane is a Wali or Mahapurush. Sixth plane is a Pir, Sat Purush. Getting up to near the top sphere within the big oval, Paratpar Parabrahma means neither Nirguna nor Saguna, neither Nirakar nor Sakar, the beyond state, in Arabic known as Gaib ul Gaib, Wara ul Wara, Zat al Bat. So that's the chart number 5 called The Journey. Continuing on 131, after the goal is attained at the end of the first divine journey, but very rarely, however, God as man, now in God's state, can leave infinite bliss and come down to normal consciousness from the superconscious I am God state and begin to experience the state of Baka, thus entering the second divine journey. The Sufi term Baka means abiding in. And here we have note number 21 in the supplement. 21, title The Sufi Conception of Fana and Baka. This is a short study of the terms Fana and Baka as understood by the Sufis. Every plane has a Fana and Baka of its own. It must remember that the Fana of the planes is not the Fana of the seventh plane, and that the Baka of the planes is not the Baka of the Kutub state, the state of perfection. The following are some of the chief points of comparison in Sufi gnosis, and it will be seen that their exposition is mostly in relation to the seventh plane, and that their terms have, of course, a transcendental application. Fana literally means effacement or annihilation. It is a state that is not permanent. Baka literally means permanence and is a state that abides forever. Fana signifies the end of traveling towards God. Baka signifies the beginning of traveling in God. Fana is not to be considered as an attribute. It is not like the dissolution of sugar in water. According to Hujwiri, it does not signify the disappearance of essence. Baka represents that which was non-existent before and will not be non-existent afterwards, like the essence of God. Fana is the disappearance of the cognition of Gair, parentheses, the other, i.e. duality. Baka is the knowledge of God that one gains after the disappearance of Gair, duality. Fana, according to Mahmud Shabistari in Gulshan Eraz, is death of passion, of self-will, and of the ego, resulting in the spiritual awakening to eternal life, Baka. It also means the forgetfulness of the false ego, Kudi, which has so long been concealing man's reality, God, from himself. If it occurs to the aspirant that he is effaced from self, it is a defect. The highest state is to be effaced from effacement. Vana is of two kinds, outward and inward. Outward vana, this is the vana of deeds and the glory of divine deeds. The possessor of this vana becomes so immersed in divine deeds that he is oblivious of himself and of everything except of the desire and the will of God. Some holy aspirants have attained this mukam, wherein they are so indifferent to physical needs that God appoints someone to look after them. Inward vana. This is the vana of qualities in Zat, reality. The possessor of Hal, experience, in the revelation of the attributes of God, is immersed sometimes in the vana of his own qualities, and sometimes in the manifestation of the influence, parentheses asar, and the glory, parentheses tajali, of God. Outward vana is a portion of the lords of the heart and of the companions of Hal. Inward vana is peculiar to the noble ones who have outgrown the sway of Hal and have pierced the veil of the heart. And from the society of the men of the heart, they have joined the society of the converter of hearts, God. Bhaka, that is, in relation to outward vana, is this. After vana of desire and of will, God makes the slave into a master of desire and will, and gives him absolute control of the reins of guidance. Bhaka, in relation to inward vana, is this. The soul becomes neither God as the veil of creation, nor creation the veil of God. In vana, God is the veil of creation, and to those who have not reached the state of vana, creation is the veil of God. That does it for the note. Back to page 131. To come down to normal consciousness from the superconscious I am God state, and to experience the abiding in God state, would mean getting established in the very life of God. Thus, in Bhaka, the life of God in a human being is established. This means that in Bhaka, man establishes himself as God consciously. This consciousness is called Salukyat, or the normal consciousness of being established in the life of God. Distinct from this is the Majzubiyat, or, quote, being drowned or absorbed by infinite bliss, in the state of, quote, I am God. Accordingly, God as man, experiencing the state of Bhaka, is called the real Salik in Sufi terminology. This Bhaka of reality and divinity is called Baka-bila. In Vedanta, it is known as Atma Pratisthapana. The Salik not only experiences infinite power and infinite knowledge while in infinite bliss, as in Majzubiat, but now, being the Salik, he consciously accumulates all the infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss while being established in the life of God with the normal consciousness of his Salukiyat. But before finally and really, quote, passing away in the reality of the ultimate Phana-phila state with full consciousness completely matured, and before getting established in the final Baka-bila of divinity, generally speaking, in terms of illusion, there are as many individualized experiences of Phana Baka as there are varied and innumerable species and states of life in creation. Nevertheless, three fundamental types of Phana Baka include all the individualized experiences of Phana Baka. The first of the three fundamental types is the rudimentary. This type is the Phana Baka of the phenomenal, false life in illusion experienced by all who daily, quote, passing away in, end quote, Phana, gain Baka to, quote, abide in, end quote, illusion every day. This rudimentary Phana Baka of the ordinary false life is composed of the ordinary sound sleep state and the ordinary awake state. As stated before, even when one with all of the impressions of illusion, quote, passes away in, end quote, sound sleep, the same original divine absolute vacuum of the God is state is established, where never anything existed and where nothing ever exists except the one infinite and only reality as the everything, which is called the infinitude of God in his God is state. When the impressions of illusion with which one goes to sleep wake one up, one abides in illusion itself in the awake state and establishes everyday life in illusion. Accordingly, in everyday life, when one goes into sound sleep, Phana is established as one daily, quote, passes away in the original God state without consciousness. And when one wakes up daily, Baka is gained to abide in the everyday life of illusion, as long as sound sleep does not overpower and drag one once again into the state of the daily Phana, which is the One's original divine state of absolute vacuum. The second type of Phana Baka is of the planes on the path towards attainment of the goal and differs from the rudimentary type of the ordinary phenomenal false life in illusion, although this second type of Phana Baka of the planes is also illusion. In every plane, from the first through the sixth plane on the path, the full consciousness evolved is being gradually withdrawn inwards or involved. Hence, the Phanabhaka of the plains is in accordance with the impressions impregnating the involving consciousness and differs from the first type of rudimentary Phanabhaka of the impressioned consciousness that is fully evolved or is still in the process of evolution. Every plane on the path towards the goal of Phanaphyla has its Phanabhaka, while the fully evolved consciousness is being gradually involved in conjunction with progressive advancement in the planes. But the generalized meaning of the Sufi term Fana is the passing away in the absolute vacuum of the original God-is state. Therefore, whether the Fana is of the rudimentary type of the ordinary phenomenal false life or of the second type of the planes on the path, it does not make any difference at all. In both types, the Fana passing away in is fundamentally the same, for daily in the sound sleep state, the impressioned consciousness in both cases passes away in the same state of absolute vacuum, regardless of all the differences in the types of impressions of illusion. Although the Fana is always the same in both the evolving consciousness and the involving consciousness, yet it is the type of impressions of illusion with which the consciousness is impregnated while abiding in illusion during the awake state that really matters and that does create the differentiation when passing away in the sound sleep state or in the state of Fana. For example, the Fana of an animal or a creature in the sound sleep state, quote, passing away in the absolute vacuum with its own particular impressions of illusions, differs completely from the Fana of a human being in the sound sleep state, quote, passing away in the absolute vacuum with his own particular impressions of illusion. Similarly, the impressions of illusion of an ordinary human being will be quite different from the impressions of illusion of a human being in the planes of the path. In all cases, though the different types of Fana remain always as Fana, yet the different impressions impregnating individual consciousness in the Baka of the awake state give rise to the individualized Fana of each and all species and states of life in creation. In contrast with that, when the Baka of the individualized life is gained in the awake state after the sound sleep state of Fana, the Baka, which in Sufi terms means abiding in, establishes in illusion the everyday individualized life of illusion in accordance with the predominant impressions with which the individualized life had passed away from the variety of impressions of illusion in the state of its individualized Fana in the sound sleep state. As such, every individualized Baka completely differs from every other baka, because when this individualized baka is gained in the awake state, the impressions of the impressioned consciousness of every individualized life are solely responsible for establishing in illusion the individualized life of illusion. Hence, it is that in regular, unfailing succession, the fauna of illusion in the sound sleep state is invariably followed by the baka of illusion in the awake state, which in turn gets lost in the inevitable fauna, only to alternate and reestablish again and again, day after day, year after year, and life after life, irrespective of whether this fauna or baka is of the ordinary phenomenal false life or is of the planes on the path. It is never stable as long as it is of the illusion. As long as individualized life does not really and finally pass away in the phonophila of reality and become established in the abiding bakabila of divinity, it is obvious that there are bound to be innumerable and diverse types and groups of phanabaka, of illusion, in accordance with the persisting impressions that consistently impress the evolving and the involving consciousness of individualized life in baka. In every plane also, from the first through the sixth plane of involving consciousness, there is bound to be a particular type of baka for each of the 6 planes, in accordance with the particular impressions of the illusion of each plane. When a man is said to be on the first plane, his fully evolved consciousness is beginning to involve, and his full consciousness remains focused on the first plane of the subtle sphere, because the impressions of the first plane consistently impregnating his involving consciousness make him abide in the first plane and lead him to experience the illusion of this plane. Even though the gross body of the man on the first plane is exactly like the gross body of a man not on the first plane, and though the man on the first plane also sleeps and wakes up exactly like an ordinary man of the everyday phenomenal false life, yet because his involving consciousness is directly focused on the first plane, he passes away in the sound sleep state of the first plane fauna with the impressions of the illusion of the first plane, and wakes up daily to get established in the first plane baka, to abide in the first plane, and to experience the impressions of that plane. The difference between the fauna baka of the man who enters the planes of the path and of the man who is not on the planes of the path is that the former can be likened to a man who, after living for many years in a certain place, severs all of his past connections and sets out on a world tour, traveling from one place to another, crossing continents one after the other. Although this man would be daily going to sleep and awakening the next day as he was accustomed to sleeping and awakening every day in his first habitat, yet now, in the course of his world tour, he would be passing away in sound sleep and would be daily waking up, evidently with the predominant impressions of his completely changed environments and novel experiences. Here we have note 22 of the supplement. It's titled Involution of Consciousness. Meher Baba comments further. Quote, full consciousness, which is complete as soon as the first human form is taken, gradually withdraws plane after plane. This involution of consciousness, which consciousness is already complete, begins for the first time when the hard set, gross impressions become thinned out. Consciousness thus experiences the first plane. As the impressions get thinned out still more, the consciousness withdraws, involves more, and experiences the second plane, and so forth until the seventh plane is attained. Withdrawal of consciousness means that at first the consciousness which was complete was focused on gross impressions and far from being focused on self. Later on, in the process of involution, as the impressions thin out more and more gradually, with the help of diverse experiences of opposites, the consciousness also concurrently shifts its focus gradually towards self. In the seventh plane, the consciousness is no longer impressioned consciousness, and this naturally results in the consciousness focusing upon itself. This means that the consciousness identifies itself with self as all impressions have vanished. Back to page 135. In short, he who enters the first plane of involving consciousness eventually experiences the first plane fully. This man, who is getting established in the first plane, establishes his living in this world of his own, and therefore he sleeps in this plane and wakes up every day in this plane as well. In exactly the same way, all individualized consciousness in all other planes passes away in the fauna of those particular planes to wake up in such planes and establish the everyday life baka in these particular planes. Nevertheless, the fauna baka of every plane of the path is fundamentally of the same type, because it pertains only to consciousness that is involving gradually, and not to that of the evolving nor of the evolved consciousness. Whatever difference there is to differentiate the fauna baka of one plane from another plane would only be such as would exist between two men living on two different continents of the same earth and having their own individual impressions of that particular part of the earth on which each lives. The man in America has his own impressions and relative experiences of his individualized life. The same is true of the man in Asia, who has his own impressions and experiences related to his continent, which is quite different from America. But the fundamental fact remains that both men live on the same earth. Despite the vast difference between the impressions and the consequent experiences of these two men, yet when both sleep, they both pass away in sound sleep. And whether one sleeps on a bed of velvet and the other on a bed of hay, it is quite immaterial when both can equally enjoy the same sound sleep state. In like manner, when both wake up, they both can live their individual lives in illusion on the same earth, irrespective of the difference in their impressions and their consequent relative experiences due to living on different continents. Thus, the Fanabakas of all the planes on the path are not in any way different fundamentally, although each and every plane on the path has its own Fana and Baka when individualized life on the planes is under consideration. Just as the rudimentary first type of Fana and Baka includes all the individualized faunas and bakas of dogs, horses, camels, elephants, of all creatures and human beings that live the phenomenal false life of illusion in the gross world, so also the second type of fauna and baka of the plains on the path includes all the individualized fauna bakas of each and all on every plane from the first through the sixth planes of the illusory, subtle, and mental worlds. When a man in a particular plane, with his consciousness gradually evolving, becomes completely dazed by the enchanting experiences of the plane, the man is said to be a majzub of this particular plane. Asterisk, the majzub and salik of the planes should not be confused with the real majzub of the seventh plane, known as majzub e kamil, perfect majzub, nor the real salik of the seventh plane. Such a majzub is completely absorbed and overpowered by the impressions of illusion of the plane, which consistently impregnate his consciousness. Even in the awake state, this majzub of the plane behaves as if he were completely intoxicated by and drowned in the enchantment of the plane. Such a man is commonly known as a must, meaning thereby that the man is God intoxicated. On the other hand, if a man in a particular plane does not get absorbed in and overpowered by the fascinating experiences of the plane, but continues to maintain his poise throughout, while his involving consciousness is persistently impressed by the impressions of illusion of that plane, he is then said to be a salik of that particular plane. Such a salik, to all external appearances, behaves like a very normal man of the world, even though his consciousness is progressively involving and is completely dissociated from the gross world as far as his consciousness, fully focused on the particular plane, is concerned. The salukiyat and musti of each plane are different. There are, however, certain cases when a man in a particular plane is sometimes completely drowned in and absorbed by the fascination of the experiences of the plane and behaves like a majzub, and other times he regains his poise and behaves like an ordinary, normal salik of the plane. Such a man on the plane is said to be a majzub salik of the plane if the predominant behavior is that of a majzub, and a salik majzub of the plane if the predominant behavior is that of a salik. Such a state in illusion may be compared with the turiya avastha of the divine junction in reality. The third type of phanabhaka is of the seventh plane of the final involution of consciousness and is the real phana-phila of the reality and the real bhaka-bila of the divinity. When the impressioned consciousness of individualized life is totally and finally relieved of all impressions of the illusion, and when this unburdened or impressionless individualized self consciously passes away in the original divine absolute vacuum to gain the phana-phila or the I am God state, the goal is finally attained. This is the state of real majzubiyat. Here we have note 23 from the supplement, is titled 5 Algebraic Definitions. God, 1. God equals infinite existence plus infinite knowledge plus infinite bliss minus unconsciousness equals Sat plus Chit plus Anand minus unconsciousness equals Sat Chit Anand minus unconsciousness. 2. Perfect Master equals Kutub equals Sadguru equals infinite existence plus infinite knowledge plus infinite bliss plus consciousness equals conscious of being infinite and conscious of finite simultaneously. 3. Savior equals perfect man equals insan kamil equals puratan purush equals Buddha equals saheb zaman equals rasul equals avatar equals living Christ equals infinite existence plus infinite knowledge plus infinite bliss plus consciousness equals conscious of being infinite and conscious of being finite simultaneously. 4. Man or jivatma or insan equals body plus energy plus mind plus consciousness plus soul. 5. Majzub et Kamil equals divine I equals divine consciousness minus finite consciousness. Back to page 137. The only but infinite difference between the faunas of all the different individualized species and states of illusory life and the final real fauna of the divine life is that in the former the consciousness is nil, while in the latter, full consciousness prevails. After the state of Phanafila, the state of Bhakabila is established by some individualized selves to live the life of God as man-God on the earth. Such a man-God lives at one and the same time in all the states of life and in all planes. The life of man in illusion, knowing illusion as illusion, and of God in reality. This is the state of real sulukiyat. After attaining the state of Phanafila and before establishing the state of Bhakabila, there is also a state of Turiya Avastha at the divine junction between Phanafila and Bhakabila. In this state, there is sometimes the experience of real Majzubiyat of the Phanafila and sometimes the experience of real Sulukiyat of the Bhakabila. This is the state of the real Majzub Salik or Salik Majzub, as the case may be. The consciousness of the false limited I, which was there before Phana, matured through the process of involution, and the limited false I was replaced by the real unlimited I in Phanafila. In Bhakabila, this matured consciousness is now focused once again and is fixed on the I as the real unlimited I, on the mind as universal mind, on energy as unbounded energy, and on the body as the universal body called the Mahakarana Sharir. An important fact must be noted here, that in the state of Bhakabila, simultaneously the same consciousness is also focused and fixed on the limited I, mind, energy, and body. Wherefore, the Salik consciously experiences the false as falsity with the false, and the real as reality with the real. Consequently, in God's state of Bhakabila, the same consciousness simultaneously experiences the dual experiences of I am God and I am human. Along with this dual experience, the same consciousness spontaneously also experiences, without break, the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of God, along with the experiences of the weaknesses and sufferings of humanity. It follows that in God's state of Bhakabila, God, in the form of an ordinary human being, establishes himself in his divine life, or man, quote, abides in the life of God. In short, Bhakabila is that state of God where abiding in, or getting established in God, is experienced by those who are defined as saliks or jivan muktas. Here we have notes 24 and 25 of the supplement. 24 is titled The Four Types of Mukti, or Liberation. Certain well-known terms to describe various types of perfection are stated here briefly so that the seeker may fit them into the framework of the subject of God realization. In describing these types of perfection, The key word mukti, which literally means liberation, is used here to define four types of liberation. In the following table, all the four types of liberation, mukti, of the soul belong to the seventh plane. 1. Ordinary mukti. Parentheses, ordinary moksha. 2. Vidya mukti. 3. Jivan mukti. 4. Param mukti. 1. Ordinary mukti, najat, is achieved only after death by some exceptionally God-fearing, truth-loving, good souls, and this mukti usually comes 3 to 5 days after the soul has left the body. Since this mukti is attained without the body, the individual soul enjoys only bliss, and although power and knowledge are there, such a mukta cannot experience them. Such a liberated soul is conscious only of the bliss of union, and for him creation no longer exists, thereby bringing to an end the constant round of births and deaths. Nirvikalpa samadhi must not be confused with this ordinary mukti or moksha state. Should a soul reach the mukti state, it does so after the death of the physical body. Such a soul reaches God, but this occurs only after death. Thus, there is an important distinction between ordinary mukti on the one hand and nirvikalpa samadhi on the other, because the latter is experienced while the soul retains the body and thus becomes vidya mukta. 2. Some God-realized souls, known as vidya muktas, retain the body for 3 or 4 days after becoming realized. Their consciousness is merged completely in their own real self, God, and they are not, therefore, conscious of their bodies or of creation. They experience constantly the infinite bliss, power, and knowledge of God, their own self now, but they cannot consciously use them in creation, nor help others to attain liberation. Nevertheless, their presence on earth for the few days they remain there is a center for the radiation of the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss of God, and those who approach them, serve them, and worship them are immensely benefited. Others retain the body for years according to the momentum of their prarabdha. The Vidya Mukta is the Brahmi Bhut, or the Majzub e Kamil of the Sufis, and he experiences the trio nature of God, Sat Chit Anand, automatically. Number 3, the Jivan Mukta, parentheses, Azad e Mutlak, in Turiya Avastha, parentheses, Fana Ma'albaka, enjoys all bliss, all knowledge, and all power, and his consciousness is of the I am God state, and also of the three spheres, the gross, subtle, and mental. But being without duty, he does not use the bliss, knowledge, and power for others. Number 4, the Param Mukta, who is known as the perfect master, Kutub, or Sadguru, comes back to normal consciousness after God realization and is simultaneously conscious of the quote, I am God state and the three relative existences and their corresponding spheres. He not only enjoys all power, all knowledge, all bliss, but uses them in all the planes of existence through the universal mind and the universal body. Such param muktas are conscious of themselves as God, both in his unmanifest and manifest aspects. They know themselves both as the unchangeable divine essence, parentheses, Zat, and as the infinitely varied manifestations, parentheses, Sifat. They experience themselves as God apart from creation, as God the creator, preserver, and destroyer, and as God who has accepted and transcended the limitations of creation. This means that such a one is conscious of every one of the 10 states of God shown on the chart facing page 158. The Param Mukta constantly experiences and uses the absolute peace and perfection of the trio nature of God, Sat Chit Anand. He fully enjoys and suffers the divine sport of creation. He knows himself as God in everything and is therefore able to help everyone spiritually and can make other souls realize God as any of the 4 types of mukta. He is indeed the helper of humanity in particular and of creation in general. Note 25, a summary of the 4 types of mukti, referring back to page 138. Meher Baba summarizes these 4 types of mukti in the following way. Ordinary mukti. The heading is consciousness. Anand, parentheses, bliss only. No consciousness of, quote, I am God, or of duality. The heading is duty in duality. No. The Vidya Mukti, quote, I am God, Sat Chit Anand, or knowledge, power, and bliss, without consciousness of duality. No duty in duality. The Jivan Mukti, quote, I am God, Sat Chit Anand, with consciousness of duality. No duty in duality. The Param Mukti, simultaneously, quote, I am God, Sat Chit Anand, with duality and divinity in action. Yes, duty in duality. See also the summary, pages 278-279, editor. So back to page 138. I'll just read the first sentence of that paragraph again. In short, Bhakabila is that state of God where abiding in or getting established in God is experienced by those who are defined as saliks or jivan muktas. The salik continually and consciously experiences simultaneously the dual experience of the I am God state and I am human state, and accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, simultaneously experiencing human weaknesses and sufferings, knowing their falsity to, to, to be based on the manifestation of the finite nothing that manifests out of his own state. Of being everything and infinite. In Bhakabila, the life of God in human being established, man as God experiences the Sahaj Samadhi. This means that man as God simultaneously, without the least effort, has continually and automatically the dual experience of God and of man. This is the state of perfection. Perfection generally carries with it the sense of the highest pitch of, or the extreme type of accomplishment, and perfection as such cannot become more perfect. But when the term perfection is used in terms of divinity, there are three types of perfection in the state of Sulukiyat of Bhakabila. The first type is known as Kamil, the perfect one. The second type is known as Akmal, the most perfect one. The third type is known as Mukamil, the supremely perfect one. Opposite, we have chart 6, titled The Four Journeys. Infinite God, an oval surrounding from the bottom, the infinite gross sphere containing millions of universes, from the most finite point in and out of the infinite comes out the infinite gross sphere, containing our earth, gross world, human, animal, bird, fish, worm, vegetable, stone, metal. Throughout the millions of universes, throughout which are some planets which contain the 7 kingdoms of evolution. Still in illusion, we have the planes on which few persons embark. The subtle world, first through fourth planes. mental world fifth and sixth, and the first journey is the subtle and mental worlds. The seventh plane fauna, very few persons arrive here at the end of the first journey, as God experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. Passing away into God, becoming God. The second journey results in abiding in God, being God, Baka, which very, very few persons go on to, as man and God experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss. The third journey takes us to living God's life, living both as man and God simultaneously. It's the Kutubiyat, which only the five perfect masters accomplish, as man and God experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, and uses them. The fourth journey, passing away as God, God drops his physical, subtle, and mental vehicles and experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss while retaining infinite individuality. And that's titled The Reality. It's all bounded by infinite God. So back to the text, page 139. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever in their continual and conscious experience of the eternal reality, but the degrees of comparison that are attached to the perfection are due to the difference in the function of the offices of perfection. Hence, due to differences in function, different attributes are attached to each type of perfection. The Camille can spontaneously give conscious experience of the realization of God to only one man, and makes only that man like unto him in the eternal experience of the reality. The Akmal can make many like unto him in experience, whereas the Mukamil can make not only any number, even all in creation, like unto him in the experience of the eternal reality. There was a asterisk there. A Mukamil can make all creation God realized if he wishes. All creation means all human beings and everything that is in creation, from a particle of dust to an elephant. But a Mukamil will never wish to do so, because the carrying out of such a wish would mean the end of cosmic illusion, the whole creation. To put an end to cosmic illusion would amount to putting an end to the divine play, and to end the divine play would go against the very nature or characteristics of God in his original state too, described on page 161, when he remains infinitely conscious and simultaneously infinitely unconscious. So I'll just reread. The Akmal can make many like unto him in experience, whereas the Mukamil can make not only any number, even all in the creation like unto him in the experience of the eternal reality. But he can also spontaneously bestow on any number the transfiguration of their physical bodies, and even make their physique appear and live and experience like unto his own physical body in the gross world, together with giving the eternal conscious experience of the reality. Bhakabila is the end of the second divine journey. In between the states of Phanafila and Bhakabila, at the divine junction, parentheses, Mukam Furutat, there is the state of Turiya Avastha, parentheses, Phana Ma'albaka. Turiya Avastha is that state where sometimes the superconsciousness gives the experience of the I am God state, and where sometimes superconsciousness gives the experience of the I am human state of normal consciousness. This state is experienced by those who are termed Majzub Salik or Paramahansa, and who in this state of Turiya Avastha sometimes experience consciously as, quote, I am my own God, and sometimes experience consciously as, quote, I am my own creature. At the divine junction between the end of the first and the beginning of the second divine journey, the fluctuating divine experience of divine and human are experienced alternately until the I am state, I am God state of Phanafila gradually becomes established in the state of Bhakabila, where the abiding in God state is established and where man as God simultaneously, without the least effort, automatically undergoes the dual experience of God and man at one and the same time. As soon as the divine junction is crossed, the Majzubiyat of Phanafila becomes established as Sulukiyat in Bhakabila. The Majzub of Majzubiyat could only consciously experience infinite knowledge and power while being drowned in infinite bliss. Asterisk there. Meher Baba was asked, if Majzubs are utterly unconscious of all the spheres, gross, subtle, and mental, of everything except the I am God state, then how is it they react to the physical side of life, eating, drinking, showing preference to certain things, antipathy to others? Meher Baba replied, the Majzub may apparently like or dislike, ask or reject, seem happy or angry. It is an automatic reflex action of which he is unconscious, like the sound of snoring is to the fast asleep man emitting it. Like the sleepwalker who is unconscious of his actions, however normal or varied they may be, the Majzub is oblivious to his body and surroundings and is conscious only of his divine state of I am God. The Salik of Salukiyat, however, not only consciously experiences but also consciously accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, although he does not use these infinite aspects for others as Kutubs of the Kutubiyat do. The end of the second divine journey leads to the third divine journey, which is the state of Kutubiyat, where living the life of God is actually experienced by those who are termed Kutubs or Sadgurus or perfect masters. The state of Kutubiyat, which follows the Sulukiyat of Bakabila, is where man as God, established in the life of God in Bakabila, now begins to live the life of God in the state of Kutubiyat as a Kutub or a Sadguru. He now not only consciously experiences as in the state of Fanafilla and consciously accumulates as in the state of Bakabila infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, but uses these infinite aspects in this state of Ketubiyat for those who are still in illusion. Such a man of the state of Ketubiyat is called a perfect master. Here we have note 26 of the supplement. 26, titled Signs of Perfection, referring back to page 141. In answer to a question by a disciple requesting some infallible method of recognizing a perfect master, Meher Baba explained, an ordinary man may not be able to discriminate satisfactorily between the different stages of spiritual attainment up to the sixth plane. He may be able to know that such souls are advanced, but not the extent of their advancement. But when a sincere and patient seeker of truth comes into contact with one who is spiritually perfect, he will observe certain outer signs that are inseparably associated with inner spiritual perfection. The most important of these signs are three. Firstly, perfection is not only oneness with God, but the continual and uninterrupted experience of oneness in everything. A perfect master continually, without break, experiences and realizes his own self as the self in all. This inner experience objectively manifests itself in the spontaneity of love that such a one feels or expresses towards all creation. To him, nothing is attractive or repulsive. Good and bad, saint and sinner, beauty and ugliness, wisdom and idiocy, health and disease, all are modes of his own manifestation. When embodied, perfection loves, fondles, or feeds any living creature. It feels and enjoys as if it were loving, fondling, and feeding its own self. In this stage, no vestige of otherness is left. The second sign is the atmosphere of bliss that perfection radiates in its immediate vicinity, an atmosphere that a stranger in search of it cannot help feeling. A perfect master not only enjoys infinite bliss, but also experiences universal suffering. The acuteness of suffering, however, is nullified or subdued by the overwhelming feeling of bliss. Hence, perfection can outwardly appear blissfully calm in the face of every kind of suffering and persecution. The third sign of perfection is its power to adapt itself to any level of humanity. It can be as nonchalant on a throne as in a gutter. It can very naturally be thrifty with the poor, extravagant with the rich, regal with kings, wise with the learned, and simple with the illiterate and the ignorant. Just as a master of letters teaches English in different ways to beginners and graduate students, so also a perfect master adapts himself to the level of those whom he wants to uplift spiritually. Once, Ghaus Ali Shah Qalandar, while discoursing on spiritual perfection, Fakiri, said, "Giving perfection to a disciple is a matter of a fraction of a second. A word in the ear is enough to lift a man at once from finiteness to infinity, and such a transformation is not dependent on prayers or fasts." Maulana Rumi has said, "Dad id ura, kabiliyat I shart nist, balki sharti kabiliyat dadi ust." Divine grace is not limited by conditions of ability. Ability, in fact, is conditioned by divine grace. Hearing this, one of the disciples remarked, "Sire, if realization be so easy of attainment, then why is it that disciples are invariably made to undergo a long period of trials and austerities?" In reply, Ghaus Ali Shah related the following anecdote. A certain man, having two vessels encrusted with the rust and dirt of many years, decided to have them cleansed. He gave one vessel to a professional, who promised to cleanse it in 40 days, and the other to a man who undertook to do the job in a single day. The professional began to work at his vessel scientifically. He subjected it to many different processes over a period of 40 days, and he made the vessel not only spick and span, but also a thing fit for use. The second man, who had promised to finish the job in one day, adopted the very drastic procedure of burning the vessel in a huge fire. This cleansed the vessel quickly and completely, but made it brittle and worthless. It can be seen, therefore, that although both the vessels were made clean, only that which underwent the lengthy process was of any use. The master went on to say that it was for this reason that a perfect master seldom gave realization to an aspirant instantaneously, but led him to it slowly, so that he might become a robust, useful vessel for God's work. In this connection, Meher Baba once remarked to his disciples, "Realization can be imparted to anyone in a second. It will then be for one's own self only, with no benefit to others. The period of austerity, self-denial, and hardship which one undergoes with a master engenders power and gives authority to use realization, when achieved, for the spiritual awakening of others." Asterisk. See also Mirbaba Perfection, Discourses 78 to 82, for the understanding of the difference between spiritual perfection and the relative perfection pertaining to the domain of duality. Editor. So now we go back to page 141. I'll just reread the last sentence. Such a man god of the state of Kutubiyat is called a perfect master, who as man has not only become God and established himself in God, but lives the life of God as God's individual representative in illusion. The dual role of I am God and I am human, which was established in Bakabila, is now not only simultaneously experienced, but is also lived through in the state of Kutubiyat, and the man God, Kutub, Sadguru, or perfect master, now simultaneously lives the life of God and the life of man with all of the strength of the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of the God state, together with all of the weakness and sufferings of the man state. At the end of the third divine journey, the perfect master not only lives a dual role and displays strength and weakness simultaneously, but also simultaneously utilizes this display of infinite strength through infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, and infinite weakness through infinite suffering for those who are in ignorance and who still conceive the false finite illusion to be infinite and real. In contrast to this state, in the state of Bakabila, God experiences his godhood constantly, simultaneously with the continual and constant experience of his manhood. And yet he cannot use the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, and also cannot utilize the infinite weakness and suffering for those in ignorance, because God does not live the life of God in this state as in the state of Kutubiyat. It is very, very rare, and it is for only very, very few to begin and to end their third divine journey in the Kutub or Sadguru state. In this state, man as God now lives the life of God. He now uses the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss that he experiences. He is that God and man, or man-God, who has brought down the one indivisible existence into the many. He is that man-God who brought down independent reality into illusion and controls illusion from the divine office of his beyond state, Vidnyan Bhumika, or Mukam and Muhammadi. Here we have note 27 from the supplement. Hal and Mukum, referring back to 141, page 141. Here is a gist of Hal, experience, and Mukam, stage, in the light of Sufi gnosis. Some Sufis believe there is no appreciable difference between Hal and Mukam. They maintain that every Mukam is Hal at the beginning and develops into Mukam at the end. This applies to all the planes included in the subtle and mental spheres. Many, however, distinguish Hal from Mukam. According to Abdullah Haris Huasabi of Basra, Hal is the gift of God. It is as fleeting as lightning and is secured by practice. Mujahida. Mukam is the result of repentance and is secured by the constant overshadowing of Hal. The author of Awarif ul Ma'arif has it thus: Hal signifies a hidden event that descends from the upper world upon the heart of the pilgrim and keeps going and coming until the divine attraction draws him from the lowest to the highest level. Mukam is the station on the path at which the pilgrim arrives. It becomes the place of his stay until he advances further. Hal is not under the control of the pilgrim. The pilgrim is controlled by it. Mukam is in the traveler's sway. Hal is a gift, ma'ohib. Mukam is an acquisition, kazb. Hal can never be without being related to Mukam. Mukam can never be without being related to Hal. Sheikh Mohammed Ibrahim, also known as Ghazur Ilahi, in his Irshadat says, when Hal continues, it becomes Mukam. Whoever gets Hal once is a beginner, and whosoever continues in it becomes an adept. Meher Baba explains that in the general sense of the word, Hal is the inner experience which includes ecstasy, both controlled and uncontrolled, of relative existences on the first through the sixth planes, stages of the path. In the particular sense, Hal is the state of divine ecstasy and is always experienced in degrees of potency according to its relative Mukam. Hal in Vedanta is called Bhav, and Mukam is called Than. Mukam is the staying of the pilgrim on a given plane in that particular Hal. Hal and Mukam go together up to and onto the sixth plane. Hal always dominates Mukam. Hal and Mukam do not exist on the seventh plane. Where there is Hal, there is duality. When one from the seventh plane comes down to normal consciousness and establishes himself on any plane for the sake of duty, then that particular plane becomes his Mukam. Thus, for the Kutub Sadguru, there is no Hal, there is only Mukam. Ordinary men who are by nature emotional can enjoy ordinary Hal while listening to music. But this is a pseudo-Hal and is not to be compared with the spiritual Hal